morning, everyone. Welcome to Department 2203. Please have a seat. Following the case of United States of America versus Charlie DuPont, may I have the appearances of counsel, please?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Austin Aletta, and along with my co-counsel,
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Cody Copen.
we have the privilege of representing the United States of America throughout today's trial, United States versus Charlie DuPont. Now, Your Honor, for courtesy of Your Honor as well as the members of the jury, we do have courtesy copies of our notice of appearance, which does have the proper spelling of our first and last name and our indication team number, that being Team B. May my co-counsel approach?
Actually, if you could hand that to the bailiff, and I'll have the bailiff approach.
Yes, Your Honor.
I appreciate the courtesy. These are copies of the same documents.
Yes, Your Honor. They were just one for you and the rest for you.
Thank you very much.
With that, Your Honor, we are ready to proceed. We have a few housekeeping matters to attend to prior to trial.
I would actually like to have the appearances of counsel first before you get to any preliminary matters.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Caitlin Burrell, and along with my co-counsel,
Good morning, Your Honor. Elizabeth Hersey.
and together we represent Charlie DuPont in this case, and we have written entries of appearance as well.
Would you please hand those to my bailiff?
Certainly, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, before I turn back to Mr. Aletta for the preliminary matters, I first want to address myself to the jury. Thank you for answering the call of the court to come and perform your civic duty. Without impartial, fair jurors, our system of democracy could not survive. So thank you for your time and your careful attention to this matter. For the purposes of this proceeding, I understand our stipulations waived. Is the reading of stipulations waived?
No, Your Honor, they are permitted. We may read into the record stipulations. There are stipulations that have been provided by this jurisdiction.
Thank you. I need to make one comment to the jury before we actually begin with the presentation of evidence, and that is that for purposes of this proceeding, we are going to do what's called a constructive sidebar. Often, when there are objections in court, the arguments related to those objections are not appropriately before the jury. Those are to be done out of the hearing of the jury, so the jury is not impacted by any arguments that are made on evidence that does not ultimately admissible. However, for the educational purposes of this event, I'm going to ask counsel to go ahead and make their arguments from where they are, and I'll ask the jury to just close your ears until either it's sustained or overruled. All right, is everyone all right with that? Okay, great. Mr. Aletta, your preliminary matters.
Yes, Your Honor. First, may both parties move freely about the well throughout this trial, except when either approaching the witness stand or the bench.
For purposes of dealing with exhibits?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, that's fine. But I think that that's appropriate to ask for permission if you're going to approach the witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, pursuant to Federal Rules of Evidence 615, the government would invoke the rule of sequestration constructively as it pertains to all witnesses in this case, excluding two, one being our expert, Blair Pickus, and the second being the defendant, Charlie DuPont.
Any objection?
We have no objection to that, Your Honor.
That will be the rule.
Now, Your Honor, since we did mention our expert, Blair Pickus, when the proper foundation has been laid for this expert, would Your Honor care for us to tender this witness as an expert in open court, do so at sidebar, or just continuing with the line of questioning once the proper foundation is laid?
That is your choice.
Now, for purposes of exhibits that are entered into evidence, may we use this area of this table right here as a clerk's table where all evidence entered will be placed?
Let me first ask our court reporter, is that going to interfere with your duties at all? All right, then you're welcome to use that half of the table.
And lastly, Your Honor, the government requests 5 minutes of time during closing arguments for rebuttal.
Oh, so you're making that reservation now?
Yes, Your Honor, just for the record.
All right, that's fine.
With that, we're ready to proceed with opening statements.
Does the defense have any preliminary matters?
Yes, Your Honor. I wanted to put the court on notice that we do intend to use PowerPoints throughout today's trial for purposes of closing argument as well as for publishing exhibits. And we have shown those PowerPoints to opposing counsel. So they are on notice of what is contained in those PowerPoints.
And for the prosecution, for the government, does the government have any objections that they'd like to address first?
There are no objections to those PowerPoints. We too indicated to opposing counsel that we do have PowerPoints of our own. We've expressed that to opposing counsel, and they are contingent upon what exhibits do come into evidence here.
All right, thank you.
And finally, Your Honor, just to put you on notice that we will be requesting time checks twice throughout the trial today, both at halftime and prior to closing arguments.
I think that that is appropriate.
Nothing further from the defense.
Thank you. And before I forget, I will offend myself, but if everyone could please be mindful of the fact that we have a court reporter and speak a little bit slower. Make sure you speak clearly, because if she doesn't take it down, it didn't happen. All right. With that, let's begin. Opening for the prosecution.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. To the defendant, Charlie DuPont, his business, his marriage, and his pride are everything. For 10 years, the defendant has literally built his business from the ground up. But one man threatened to take all of that away. One man threatened everything the defendant knew and loved. That man was the victim, Ignacio Hernandez Sanchez. Now the defendant, knowing about these threats to his business, his marriage, and his pride, knowing that everything he knew and loved was soon to come crumbling down, had to make a choice. The defendant chose to take the victim's life. The defendant had 3 reasons to fire 2 bullets and solve his one problem. Before I go any further, members of the jury, let me tell you a little bit about the victim, Mr. Sanchez. He was a hard-working, intellectual man, someone who came over to the United States of America from Chile in order to work at the defendant's business as a consultant. He was there to make some positive change in the wine industry. However, on June 5th of this year, Mr. Sanchez's body is found with 2 gunshot wounds outside the residence of 4755 Fremont Drive, right here in Sonoma County. The facts and evidence will point only one person behind that gun. Only one person with enough motive to kill the victim. And it's the defendant. Let's take a step back to the night of June 4th, the night before Mr. Sanchez's body is found. And this is what the facts and evidence are going to show. In the woods, just outside the defendant's business, the defendant stands holding his 1895 model Winchester gun. He raises it towards the back of the victim, and he pulls the trigger. Bang! A shot fires through the summer night's air, striking its intended target. The bullet hitting the victim with such force, it actually fragments inside of him. The defendant does not stop there. The facts and the evidence are going to show that one shot was not enough. The defendant grabs his model 1895 hunting rifle. He raises it towards the back of the head. Pulls the trigger once more. A second shot rings out, this time cutting straight through the victim. And shot through Mr. Sanchez. Leaves the victim with no chance of survival. So the defendant takes the victim and takes his body out to Sonoma County. The defendant, knowing what he's done, knows he needs to hide his model 1895 hunting rifle. He he needs to hide his smoking gun, members of the jury. Members of the jury, you may ask, why did the defendant want to kill his own employee? Well, the facts and evidence are going to show the defendant had 3 reasons to kill his employee. We will hear that for months. The victim had urged the defendant to do the right thing, to increase wages at his winery and improve labor conditions. We will hear about threats to the ACLU, threats to call lawsuits. And when that doesn't work, the victim threatens to expose the defendant's extramarital affair. We will hear emails and testimony regarding this subject matter. When all else fails, the day the victim is murdered, he gets into a fight with the defendant, in the defendant's own office, on the defendant's own property. This attack to his pride was the last straw, and the defendant chose to take the victim's life. Because the defendant had 3 reasons to fire 2 bullets and solve his one problem. For those reasons, members of the jury, we, the United States of America, charged the defendant, Charlie DuPont, with murder in the 1st degree and destruction of evidence. What this means, members of the jury, is that we, as the government, have the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Charlie DuPont, killed Ignacio Sanchez with malice aforethought. The killing was premeditated, and following this killing, the defendant concealed or destroyed his Winchester hunting rifle. And at the end of this trial, we will have met that burden. We will meet that burden, members of the jury, by first hearing from Special Agent Bryce Cameron Riggs of the FBI. Agent Riggs is going to take this stand. She is going to walk us through her investigation in this case. She's going to tell us about emails she reviewed and an interview she conducted with the defendant. Agent Riggs will tell us that from this interview and review of those emails, she discovered 3 possible motives the defendant had to kill the victim. The defendant's 3 reasons to kill. Agent Riggs will tell us that during this interview, she also learned the defendant owned an 1895 Winchester hunting rifle. When Agent Riggs presses the defendant about this rifle, he tries to convince her it's at a friend's cabin just outside of Jackson, Wyoming. That gun is never found. The facts and evidence will show this was intentional by the defendant. But Agent Riggs will tell us that when she executed a lawful search warrant of the defendant's 3 properties, she discovered something. Out in the woods, just outside the defendant's vineyard, she found a bullet. A bullet covered in blood with a matching partial fingerprint belonging to none other than Mr. DuPont. Agent Riggs will tell us that by taking this new discovery and comparing it to the bullet fragments found within Mr. Sanchez, she discovers that both bullets come from the same box of ammunition. We will also hear from Blair Pickus, Principal Cellular Systems Engineer at Levitsky Labs in San Francisco. Ms. Pickus is going to take the stand. She's going to walk us through her investigation as well, her analysis. She's going to tell us that she observed 3 calls made by the defendant on the late evening hours of June 4th into the early morning hours of June 5th. Calls made at 11:49 p.m., 1:12 a.m., and 1:48 a.m. These times are important, members of the jury, because we will learn from Ms. Pickus that the victim's time of death was between the hours of 11 p.m. June 4th and 3 a.m. June 5th. Ms. Pickus will tell us that by taking these 3 calls, comparing them to 3 relevant cell phone towers observed during that time, she is able to place the defendant just a mere 3 to 7 miles from where the victim's body would be discovered just a few short hours later. At the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Austin Aletta, he's going to come before you, and he's going to put the pieces of this puzzle together. And when he's done piecing together that puzzle, he's going to ask for a verdict. A verdict supported by the facts. A verdict supported by the evidence. A a verdict supported by the law. A verdict of guilty for murder in the first degree and destruction of evidence against the defendant. Because on June 4th, the defendant had 3 reasons to fire 2 bullets to solve his one problem. Thank you.
Would the defense like to give its opening statement at this time or reserve?
Yes, Your Honor, we'd like to do it now.
Proceed when ready.
Charlie DuPont sat silently in his truck, staring out at his vineyard that was once full of lucrative vines, but was now nearly desolate. Growing up in Napa, California, Charlie DuPont always dreamed of owning his own winery. For years, he worked, saved up, before he was finally able to open the DuPont family vineyard. Now, his vineyard started off small, but soon he grew it into one of the largest and most successful wineries in Northern California. But like much of the country, recently, Napa had been hit hard by changing weather conditions. Periods of droughts, followed by severe flooding, had taken a toll on the vines and business of the winery. It seemed like Charlie DuPont's dream was slipping away. But on this particular day, as Mr. DuPont looked out at his vineyard, he looked out with a sense of optimism. Because despite these changing conditions, he had found his solution. And that solution was Ignacio Sanchez. Charlie DuPont was desperate to find a way out of the financial troubles that he'd been in. So desperate that he traveled all the way to Chile to recruit Ignacio Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez was an expert viticulturalist, and for nearly a decade in South America, he had been pioneering new methods of making vines more weather resistant. Charlie DuPont knew that Ignacio Sanchez could be his solution. He quickly brought Mr. Sanchez into the winery, and immediately the two began working together to implement Mr. Sanchez's methods into the DuPont winery. Charlie DuPont needed Ignacio Sanchez. It's true that their relationship was not always easy, but Mr. Sanchez was Charlie DuPont's solution. Ignacio Sanchez was an outspoken advocate for his fellow workers. He was constantly pressuring Mr. DuPont to increase wages and change the working conditions. And as a business owner, Mr. DuPont prided himself in paying his workers fair wages and running a good business. Now, it's true sometimes these conversations got heated, and Mr. Sanchez pressured Mr. DuPont often. Now, today, Mr. Tony got up here and he talked about this fight that happened between Mr. DuPont and Mr. Sanchez. And it's true that Mr. Sanchez got frustrated with Mr. DuPont. Out in the fields, they again began having this conversation with Mr. Sanchez pressuring Mr. DuPont to increase the wages. And Mr. DuPont, he got heated. He got angry. Mr. Sanchez punched him in the face. But soon after that, the two went back into the office of the winery, talked about these issues once again, and Mr. DuPont agreed that with Mr. Sanchez's methods, promising to turn the winery around, he would increase these wages and provide the workers with the safety gear they've been asking for. At this point, these problems the two had were solved. Unfortunately, it was the next day that Mr. DuPont found out Mr. Sanchez, his friend, his business partner, and the future of his winery had been killed. Members of the jury, as the defense, we bear no burden here today. That burden rests solely on the government to prove to you each element of both crimes they've charged. Now, they got up here and they talked a lot about the things you're going to hear about today at trial. But what is crucial to keep in mind today are the things that you're not going to hear about. there are 3 important things that you won't hear about today at trial. First, you're not going to hear where Mr. Sanchez was actually killed. Second, you're not going to hear why no one from the FBI ever went to Wyoming to look for Mr. DuPont's gun. And third, you're not going to hear where Harper Williamson was on June 5th. Now, the lead investigator in this case is Special Agent Briggs. And Agent Briggs was new to investigating homicides, and she already didn't like Mr. DuPont. Now, at the time that Mr. Sanchez was killed, Agent Briggs had only been with the FBI for about a year. And she knew Mr. DuPont. She'd been to his winery before, met him, and after only a brief interaction, decided that she didn't like him. Now, Agent Briggs came on the case about a week after Mr. Sanchez was killed. And as soon as she reviewed the evidence, she saw an easy solution. And she decided that Mr. DuPont was her prime suspect. After she looked at photos of the crime scene, saw Mr. Sanchez's body, she decided that he couldn't have been killed there because there just wasn't enough blood pooling at the scene. Now, Agent Briggs, with Mr. DuPont as Agent Briggs' prime suspect, she executed 3 search warrants at his home, at his vineyard, and at his hunting cabin. And after executing these 3 search warrants, you're going to hear that Agent Briggs never found a drop of Mr. Sanchez's blood on any of those locations. In fact, you're going to hear that the government never found this missing blood at all. They never found where Mr. Sanchez was actually killed. Now, you also heard a lot about this gun that Mr. DuPont owns. And it's true, he owns a hunting rifle capable of firing a .30 caliber bullet. But at the time Mr. Sanchez was killed, Mr. DuPont hadn't seen this rifle in over a year, since he left it at his friend Sam's cabin in Jackson, Wyoming. And you're going to hear that when he talked with Agent Briggs the first time, in their initial interview, Mr. DuPont told him his hunting rifle was at his friend Sam Muzatis' hunting cabin outside Jackson, Wyoming. But despite the Federal Bureau of Investigation's extensive resources, you're going to hear that they never went to Jackson, Wyoming to look for that gun. They never looked into Sam Muzatis at all. Now, finally, today you're going to hear about someone named Harper Williamson. And Harper Williamson is Mr. DuPont's mistress, a fact that he'll admit he isn't proud of. Now, Harper Williamson, before she met Mr. DuPont, was a stripper. She had to resort to exotic dancing to make money and get by. And then she met Charlie DuPont, and life was pretty good for Harper Williamson as long as Mr. DuPont was around. He took her on shopping sprees, took her on fancy dates, even covered her rent and her car payment for months. Harper Williamson got accustomed to a more comfortable way of life with Mr. DuPont around. But then Ignacio Sanchez tried to get in the middle of their relationship. In an email to Harper and Mr. DuPont, he threatened to expose their affair if Mr. DuPont didn't agree to pay the workers higher wages. Now, Harper was furious. How dare Mr. Sanchez try and get in the middle of their relationship? So today you're going to hear that in an email she replied and said, "Charlie, baby, if you don't put an end to this ASAP, I will." On the night of June 4th, Mr. DuPont and Ms. Williamson had dinner at a Brazilian steakhouse, went to a motel in Sonoma where they stayed until about 2 a.m. Then the two parted ways, and Mr. DuPont didn't speak with Harper for about another week. Now today you're going to hear that despite having these emails, despite knowing that Harper Williamson and Mr. DuPont were together that entire evening, Agent Briggs only interviewed Harper Williamson once, even after she later changed her story. You're going to hear that Agent Briggs never searched Harper Williamson's car. He never searched her home. He never retrieved Harper Williamson's phone records. Throughout this trial, hold the government to their burden. Make them answer these 3 questions. Where was Mr. Sanchez killed? Why did no one from the FBI go to Jackson, Wyoming? And where was Harper Williamson after she left Mr. DuPont on June 5th? At the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Caitlin Burrell, will come before you and she'll review all the evidence. And it's at that time that we will ask that you find the only verdict that the evidence here today will support. A verdict of not guilty.
Thank you, Ms. Hersey. The government calls first witness, please.
Your Honor, prior to the government calling its first witness, we request a moment to set up the well for demonstrative purposes.
Counsel, I'm going to need to be able to see that too.
You as well?
Thank you.
Is this available for everyone?
Good.
Government calls Special Agent Bryce Cameron Riggs.
Good morning, Agent.
Good morning.
Mr. President, before we begin, just to advise the jury, all witnesses have constructively been sworn in.
Your Honor, may I proceed? Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to us?
Good morning. My name is Special Agent Bryce Cameron Riggs. That's spelled B-R-Y-C-E-C-A-M-E-R-O-N. Riggs, R-I-G-G-S.
Agent Riggs, what is it that you do for a living?
I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, otherwise known as the FBI.
What do you do specifically for the FBI?
I'm a homicide investigator in the Northern District of California.
As a homicide investigator, what are some of your duties that you have under that position?
I have a variety of different duties that I have as a homicide investigator, such as investigating the actual scene of a crime, interviewing individuals who are persons of interest or suspects, as well as taking information, evidence back to the lab to be processed and analyzed for DNA or blood or anything else for that matter.
Prior to working for the homicide division of the FBI, did you receive any specialized education?
Yes, I did. I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Texas in 2003. That was for criminal justice. And then after that, I went on to proceed to get my master's degree in forensic science from Penn State University in 2005.
So Agent Riggs, I want to move forward a little bit and talk about the case in hand today. How did you become involved with this case?
I became involved in this case because on June 5th of 2019, the FBI actually ended up becoming involved with a homicide that occurred in the Northern District of California.
And just to get things a little more accurate, was the homicide on June 5th?
Yes, this was on June 5th at the location of 4755 Fremont Drive in Sonoma, California.
And who was the victim of this homicide?
The victim was Ignacio Hernandez Sanchez.
And why did the FBI take over jurisdiction of this homicide?
The FBI took over jurisdiction of this homicide due to the immigration status of Mr. Sanchez.
Your Honor, let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 29, found on page 113 of the record. May I approach the witness? Agent Riggs, I'm showing you what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 29. Do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a visa application that I reviewed in my analysis of this case.
Is it in the same or substantially same condition as when you last reviewed it?
Yes, it is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it has not.
Your Honor, the government moves into evidence what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 29 as Government's 1.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Your Honor, permission to publish Government's 1 to the jury.
Government's one is admitted and may be published to the jury.
Agent Riggs, based on this application, what was Mr. Sanchez's immigration status?
His immigration status would be that he was lawfully residing in the United States under an H-1B1 visa, and that he had immigrated from the country of Chile.
What is an H-1B visa?
An H-1B1 visa is a visa that's required for anyone who immigrates into the United States to live here lawfully if they were to work in specialty occupations.
So, as someone that needed to work in a specialty occupation, where was the victim working at his time of death?
He was working at DuPont Winery and Vineyards as a consultant and viticulturist.
And why is it important that Mr. Sanchez was in possession of an H-1B1 visa at his time of death?
Well, that's important because when an H-1B1 visa holder is murdered, that becomes a federal crime and in turn becomes the FBI's jurisdiction.
Your Honor, permission to retrieve Government's 1 from the witness.
Go ahead.
So, Agent Riggs, I'd like to discuss your investigation in this case. When was the murder of Ignacio Sanchez first investigated?
It was first investigated on June 5th in the early morning hours as Mr. Sanchez was found dead in Sonoma, California.
What happened to Mr. Sanchez?
Well, he died as a result of lack of oxygen and substantial blood loss from 2 gunshot wounds to the back.
Earlier you mentioned this was a homicide. Did you make any arrests in this case?
Yes, I did. I made the arrest of Charlie DuPont.
Is Mr. DuPont in the courtroom with us today?
Yes, he is.
Could you please point and identify him by an article of clothing that he's wearing?
Yes, he's sitting right there in the suit as well as the blue shirt and teal tie.
Your Honor, let the record reflect the witness has identified Charlie DuPont as the defendant in this matter.
It will.
So, Agent Riggs, I want to talk to you about the defendant. When did the defendant become a person of interest in your investigation?
He became a person of interest pretty early on in the investigation. I conducted an interview with him seeing as he was the victim's employer, and shortly after that interview, he became a suspect.
Let's dive into that interview. During that interview with the defendant, did he mention how he and the victim knew each other?
Yes, he mentioned that he had employed the victim as a consultant at his winery, and that they had been working together for quite some time.
During that same interview, did the defendant dive deeper into what his relationship was like with the victim?
Yes, he had mentioned that they had various arguments throughout their entire relationship, and that it had become quite heated over time.
Did you review any forms of communication that corroborated with the defendant's story to you?
Yes, I did. I reviewed email communications that corroborated this.
Would you recognize those emails if I showed them to you?